You're home, it's late. The house is quiet. You hear a creak on the porch and you tell yourself it's just the wind. You see a shadow by the window and you pray it's just a tree. But what if it's not? What if the lock on your door isn't a barrier, but a challenge to whatever is standing in the dark watching you? These are not urban legends. These are stories from people who lived through the sheer terror of knowing, with absolute certainty, that someone was outside. We all have that primal fear, the violation of our safe space, the chilling idea that a stranger is just beyond the walls, separating us from the night. Welcome. Tonight, we're diving into 5 true horror stories, each one a first-hand account of that exact nightmare. We'll meet the people who lived them, understand their fears, and walk step by step through the moments that forever changed how they see the safety of their own home. If you ever feel a chill down your spine while watching, remember to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Safety in numbers, right? Let's begin. Part 1. The RV watcher. The silence of the remote forest pull-off wasn't just an absence of sound. For Mia, it was a presence. A thick, woolly quiet that swallowed the distant memory of highway hum. Her vintage RV, a cozy capsule of wood paneling and soft lamplight, felt like a defiant little spaceship in a sea of ancient pines. She'd chosen this spot for its perfect isolation, a pixelated dot on her map promising undisturbed productivity. As dusk bled into a moonless navy, the first thud against the RV's rear step was so solid, so distinctly manufactured, that her heart executed a single, sickening lurch into her throat. A rock, a falling branch. It has to be. She held her breath, ears straining. Only the returning silence, now feeling watchful. For 47 agonizing minutes, she practiced measured breathing, convincing her rational mind to stand its ground against the primal fear uncoiling in her gut. Then it began. Not a scrape, but a drag. A slow, grating exhalation of metal on metal, starting at the rear bumper and creeping with terrifying deliberateness along the passenger side wall. It was the sound of a single fingernail, if that fingernail were made of iron and intent. Mia froze, her book a dead weight in her hands. The dragging traveled the full length of her home, past her bed, past her tiny kitchenette, and paused right beside her reading chair, right outside the window where the curtain didn't quite meet the frame. Her body moved before her mind allowed it, tilting her head just enough to peer through the 2-inch gap. The exterior security light, battery-operated and weak, cast a jaundiced puddle on the needle-strewn ground. And in it stood a pair of legs, encased in dark, worn canvas work pants and heavy boots. The torso and head were swallowed by the darkness beyond the light's reach. He wasn't moving. He wasn't fidgeting. He was a statue, angled directly at her window, a human-shaped cutout of the void. Time dissolved. The soft tick of her watch became a metronome counting down an unknown end. She dared not look away, convinced that the moment her eyes left him, he would move. She counted his breaths, seeing the faint, occasional plume in the chilly air. One every 15 seconds. Slow, calm, waiting. What was he waiting for? For her to scream, to run, to turn on a light and give him a perfect silhouette. The paralysis was complete, a cocktail of terror and a bizarre, terrifying understanding. This was a ritual. He was showing her he could stand there all night. The creeping dread wasn't about a potential attack. It was the suffocating reality of the standoff itself. She spent 7 hours in that chair, muscles screaming, bladder burning, eyes locked on the unmoving legs. The dawn did not come gently. It seeped in, a gray eraser slowly removing the details of the night. First the boots became visible, caked in dry mud. Then the pants. Then, as the light reached where his waist should be, the space above them was empty. He was simply gone, not fading, but absent, as if he'd never had a top half at all. The courage to move took another hour. When she finally creaked open the RV door, the cold morning air smelled of pine and damp earth. And there, centered perfectly on the top step, was a single left-footed work boot. It was old, the leather cracked, the laces frayed. But the inside was damp, and the tread was packed with fresh, dark mud from her clearing. It wasn't a threat. It was a receipt, proof. He had been as real as the boot, and he had left a piece of himself behind, not as a token, but as a promise. I know where you park. Part 2. The face in the farmhouse. The Miller family's farmhouse wasn't just a house. It was a declaration of independence. For Sarah, the vast Nebraska silence was a balm after the city's constant sirens and shouts. For Jake, it was space to breathe. For little Chloe, it was an endless backyard. But the silence had layers, they learned. It wasn't empty. It was a container, and it began to hold something else. It always started with Buddy, their aging Labrador. He'd lift his head from his bed in the corner of the open-plan kitchen, a low, guttural rumble building in his chest. Not a bark, but a continuous, vibrating growl directed at the large window over the sink. A window that looked out onto the pitch-black expanse of their back 40. The first time Jake shone a flashlight, revealing nothing but swirling dust motes. "Coyote," he'd declare, rubbing Buddy's head. But Buddy wouldn't settle. He'd stand stiff-legged, hair ridged on his back, staring for an hour or more. Sarah joked about a ghost cow, but the joke grew thin after the third time. The motion light was Sarah's idea, a pragmatic solution. "We'll see the raccoon and he'll scurry off," she said. The night it first triggered, the explosive click-blam of light flooding the yard was startling. Sarah, washing a late-night cup, looked up, and there he was. The shock wasn't immediate. It was a slow, cold seep, like ice water filling her from the feet up. A young man, pale as a grub, his hands down at his sides, his face expressionless. He stood maybe 4 feet from the glass, perfectly centered, his hollow eyes fixed not on her, but on a point just behind her in the warm heart of their home. He didn't blink, he didn't react to the searing light, he just existed at their window. "Jake." Her voice was a papery whisper. By the time Jake barreled in, phone in hand, the yard was empty. The light remained on, illuminating a perfect, vacant circle of grass. The police were polite, diligent. They found no footprints in the dew-soft ground, no tire tracks on the access road. "Maybe a sleepwalking neighbor," the deputy suggested. The Millers tried to believe it. The second appearance was identical. Same time, 3:18 a.m., the clock burned into Sarah's memory. Same stance. Same dead-eyed stare through the now blazing light. This time, Jake roared, charging the back door. The face didn't flinch. It watched Jake's approach with the detached interest of someone watching TV. When Jake yanked the door open, the figure was simply not there. No sound of fleeing footsteps, no rustle in the grass. It had vanished between the blink of an eye and the turning of a doorknob. The terror now was in the pattern, the anticipation. Nights became a vigil. They drew the blinds, but it felt like surrender. The third time, they didn't call the police. They sat at the kitchen table in the dark, watching the sliver of light under the blind, listening to Buddy's relentless, terrified growl. They knew he was out there. They could feel the weight of his gaze through the fabric. The violation was absolute. He wasn't trying to get in. He was cataloging, studying the rhythm of their fear, the architecture of their safe place. After the fourth visit, confirmed by a hidden camera they'd installed that showed him materializing in the light, standing for 9 minutes, and then walking calmly off-camera into the impossible darkness, they broke. They sold the dream house at a loss. The new owners, they heard, loved the peace and quiet. The Millers never told them why they left. Some truths are too heavy to pass on. The horror wasn't in a chase. It was in the unbearable, repeated proof that their sanctuary was just a diorama, and someone liked to watch. Part 3. The basement door. The professor's house was a lesson in minimalist anxiety. All concrete, glass, and sharp angles, it perched on a hillside, its lower level burrowing into the earth. The basement door was a beast, solid steel, painted matte black, with a heavy industrial deadbolt that thudded into place with satisfying finality. For Ben, a broke college student, a week of house-sitting here meant a week of quiet study and Instagram-worthy sunsets. The silence of the first night was profound, a vacuum. The second night, the knocking wasn't tentative. It was authoritative. Bam, bam, bam. 3 seismic impacts that vibrated through the polished concrete floor and up the legs of Ben's chair. The sound wasn't on the front door upstairs, it was below, from the beast. Heart hammering, he crept to the interior basement stairs, flicking on the lights. The door at the bottom was an impassive black slab. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice cracking. Silence. He spent the night on the upstairs couch, a kitchen knife on the coffee table. The next night, 2:17 a.m. exactly. The same triplet knock, a little harder, a little more impatient. This time Ben shouted with forced bravado, "Go away, I've called the police." A lie, but it worked. The silence returned, thicker than before. Night 4. Ben was ready, gripped by a feverish mix of terror and rage. He would see. He positioned himself at a narrow side window in the laundry nook, which gave a diagonal view of the door's exterior. He held his breath as 2:17 approached. The digital clock on the oven flipped. 2:16, 2:17. Bam, 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 right on schedule. And then something new, a frantic metallic jangling. The deadbolt, someone or something, was on the other side, gripping the bolt's exterior plate and shaking it with terrifying force. Clang, 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 clang. The solid steel door shuddered in its frame. Ben's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a prank. This was a focused, physical attempt to breach the most fortified point in the house. As the rattling reached a crescendo, a different sound sliced through the noise. A soft, wet exhale right at the keyhole. Then a voice, not shouting but whispering with intimate clarity. It was slightly muffled by the metal, but every syllable was crisp, devoid of emotion. "I know you're watching me, Ben." The world shrunk to a pinprick. He hadn't breathed a word of his location on social media. The professor was out of the country. No one knew he was here. The voice knew his name. It knew he was at the window. It saw him seeing it. The standoff was broken. The watcher had become the known. The rattling stopped. The profound silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something listening, waiting for his next move. Ben didn't make one. He didn't run for the front door. He slid down the wall, shaking, eyes glued to the black door, waiting for the knob to turn, for the bolt to scream free. It never did. He sat there until the gray light of dawn outlined the door. Only then did he bolt, leaving everything behind. He later learned from a nervous professor that the previous owners had installed the door after repeated trespassing incidents. They'd never specified what the trespasser wanted. Ben understood now. It didn't want to steal. It wanted to play, and it knew all the rules, including the player's name. Part 4. The suburban mimic David and Alina's cul-de-sac was a perfect circle of trust. Neighbors waved, kids played in the street, and doors were often unlocked. Their horror didn't arrive with a bang, but with a familiar chime. Ding-dong. 11:43 p.m. David checked the peephole, empty. He shrugged. Kids. The next night, same time. Ding-dong, again nothing. Annoyance pricked at their sense of security. Then the mimicry began. Alina was reading in bed while David showered. From the blackness of their fenced backyard, David's voice ragged with panic. "Elena, help me. Elena." She was on her feet, sprinting for the bathroom, terror icing her veins. She threw the door open to find David covered in suds, blinking at her. "What's wrong?" he asked. The voice had been perfect. The tone, the cadence, the desperate edge, but it came from outside. They upgraded to a security system. It made them feel foolish, like they were betraying the neighborhood's gentle vibe. Then came the worst night. They were watching a movie when they both heard it, clear as a bell through the front door. The voice of Alina's 8-year-old niece, Lily. But it was wrong. It was a perfect mimic of her sweet tone, but laced with a choking, performative fear. "Aunt Alina, please let me in. I'm scared. There's a man." The words were a gut punch. Lily lived 30 minutes away. It was impossible, but the voice was so real. Alina moved first, maternal instinct overriding all logic. "Lily," she cried, rushing to the door. David was a half-step behind, yelling, "Wait." But she was already disarming the alarm, fumbling with the deadbolt. As the lock thunked open, the voice stopped. Abruptly. The silence was a physical slap. David pulled Alina back, peering out into their well-lit porch. It was utterly vacant. The motion-sensitive porch light glared down on their empty welcome mat. Then, from the dense, shadowy laurel bushes directly across the street, a spot no child could hide in, a new sound erupted. It was a laugh, but not human. It was a dry, crackling sound like branches breaking in a parched throat. Heh, heh, heh. It held no mirth, only a cold, mocking intelligence. It was the sound of something that had won. It had used their love, their deepest instincts as a key. It hadn't needed to pick the lock, it had picked their emotions. They never heard the voice again. The doorbell stopped, but the victory was absolute. The horror wasn't in what got in. It was in what the experience stole from them. They could no longer trust the sound of a loved one's call, the friendly ring of a bell, the safety of their own impulses. The monster hadn't been in the bushes. It had been in the perfect copy of a child's cry. Their sanctuary remained physically intact, but its soul, the trust that held it together, had been expertly, surgically removed. Part 5. The apartment stalker. Priya's third-floor apartment was her sleek, modern fortress. Key fob entry, a 24/7 concierge, security cameras in the halls. Her fear began not with a noise but with paper. Slips of cheap lined notepaper slid under her door with such silent precision she never heard it happen. The first, "You work too late, you should sleep." She'd laughed it off, a weird neighbor. The second, "Your blue dress is pretty. Wear it Tuesday," a chill. She wore the dress that Tuesday, a private test. The note that night, blue was the right choice, panic. She changed her locks, reported it to building management. They found nothing. The note stopped. She breathed. Then the technology betrayed her. Alone in her living room, her Bluetooth speaker, turned off, emitted a sharp pop of static, then connected. A sound began, a wet, rhythmic gargling like someone drowning very slowly in thick liquid. It lasted 10 seconds before stopping. The speaker disconnected. It happened 3 times over a week, never when she had guests. The terror became a humming background noise to her life. She checked corners. She listened at her closet door. She started sleeping with the bathroom light on. The final night, exhaustion pulled her into a fitful sleep. At 3:07 a.m., a blaring electronic jingle ripped her awake. Her large smart TV on its wall mount had turned itself on. The screen wasn't blue. It showed a grainy, green-hued night vision image. It took her 3 heartbeats to understand what she was seeing. Her own duvet. Her own pillows rumpled from her body. The angle was from high up, looking down at her bed from the corner of the room. It was a live feed, from inside her bedroom. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted to the source, the smoke detector on the ceiling near her closet. As she stared at it on the screen, a text box, white and crisp, overlaid the video feed. "Look behind you." Every instinct screamed to whirl around, to face the closet door that was just out of the frame. But a deeper, survivalist instinct, cold and clear, froze her. Don't give it what it wants. The screen and the room were in a horrific dialogue. She was on both sides of the lens. With a whimper that was pure animal fear, she did not look behind her. She rolled out of bed, low to the ground, and crawled on her belly out of the bedroom, out of the frame's view. She then ran, barefoot and sobbing, to the concierge. The police found it quickly, a tiny pinhole camera embedded in the smoke detector's test button. But they found more. In her closet's ceiling panel, which led to a network of attic crawl spaces servicing the entire floor, they found a nest. A sleeping bag, empty water bottles, protein bar wrappers, and a small monitor now dark that could receive the camera's feed. The crawl space access was in the hallway ceiling. He hadn't broken in. He'd never needed to. He lived above her, coming down into her closet when she was gone, leaving through the hall panel when she was home. He'd been listening to her sing, watching her choose the blue dress. He wasn't outside her door. He was in her walls. The ultimate horror of the someone outside story is the final, gutting reveal. They were never outside at all. They were already in. The violation wasn't impending. It was complete and had been for a very, very long time. 5 stories, one unifying terror, the fragile illusion of a locked door. Whether in a remote forest, a quiet farm, a modern basement, a friendly suburb, or a secure apartment, that feeling of being watched from the unseen dark is a fear that transcends place. These survivors didn't face ghosts or monsters in the traditional sense. They faced the much more real, and therefore more terrifying, reality of human, or something imitating human, malevolence. The true horror isn't always in the attack sometimes, it's in the waiting, the knowing, the violation of your sanctuary by a presence that just stands and watches. Suggestions and call to action: if these stories unsettled you, you're not alone. That fear is a deep-seated instinct. Let's use it wisely. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't dismiss those chills. Secure your space. Motion lights, solid locks, and security cameras aren't paranoid, they're prudent. Have a plan, know what you do. Have your phone charged. Know your exits. Community, talk to your neighbors. Look out for each other. And most importantly, if you have a true someone's outside story, share it in the comments below. Let's be a community that listens. If you want to keep facing the dark with me, make sure you've subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss our next journey into the terrifying and true. And remember, tonight, double-check your locks.